Do I want to say that? I don't know if I want to say that. Today I wanted to talk about my most and least favorite books of 2022. I didn't read a ton last year. I've certainly read more in previous years. Last year was kind of chaotic for me. There was a lot going on. I wound up taking a lot of trips, and although you do read on trips, it's not as steady as if you just sort of curled up on the couch with a blanket and read. So I wound up reading 11 novels, 1 novella, and 2 sets of short stories, which by Booktube standards isn't a lot. There are full-length reviews for all of these books, so as I read them, I do a video for them. This is just going to be a short recap. So here's all the books that I read. The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter is a series of short stories that are all focused on femininity and womanhood and sort of grim retellings or feminist bent retellings with a bloody twist of old folk tales and fables. The Last Thing to Burn by Will Dean is a book about a woman who enters Britain illegally and then is sold into human trafficking, and she winds up being sort of a slave to this guy for several years, and she's just about given up when she falls pregnant with his child and realizes that she has to escape because she doesn't want her child to live in that condition. And it's a really heart-wrenching tale, but it's incredibly moving, and I just really, really enjoyed it. Road of Bones by Christopher Golden is about a Hollywood video producer who decides he wants to make a video set in the most extreme places on Earth, and he decides to go to the coldest place in the world in Siberia. And while he's there, he has completely underestimated the extreme temperatures and how it affects not only his body, but his equipment, like his camera and his car. And he winds up butting up against supernatural forces he was not aware are present in the world because they're in these really remote areas where only a handful of people live. So it's kind of a Stephen King-esque horror story, and it's very fast-paced and very adventurous, and I really liked it. Deep Into the Weeds by Willie Handler is a almost satirical book without a satirical ending. It's about a farmer in Canada. He's a dairy farmer, and his farm isn't making any money, and his family is going bankrupt, and he just can't bear to lose his farm that's been in his family for over 100 years. So he gets a license to grow marijuana because it's legal to do so in Canada, and it doesn't go very well because he has no experience actually farming, like farming crops. He's a dairy farmer. He does cows, which is a very different experience. Anyway, so it doesn't go very well, and they wind up short, and the government is kind of asking where the extra wheat is, and so he has to do some illegal things to resupply himself, and that just sort of starts a horrible downhill snowball that absolutely destroys his life. The Cyborg Tinker by LaTorre is about a woman who winds up sort of forced to join a cyborg circus because she gets arrested, and that's the only way that she can get out of jail. She's dying and winds up with a cyborg implant in order to save her life, but in exchange she has to become a cyborg tinker, so that's somebody who sort of operates on cyborg parts specifically. Once she gets to this circus, she's on a 12-year contract, and she realizes that she's going to be made to do some really horrible things, and she has to choose between saving herself or saving the other people. It was probably one of my least favorite books of the year, if not my most least favorite book of the year, if that's a thing. I Should Have Worn a Curtain by Samyra Alexander is a duo novella set that together make a novel, and it's about a heavyset black woman who finds who she thinks is a really fit man who's interested in her, and he's sort of manipulative and almost abusive in the way that he talks to her about her weight, and about, you know, the exercise that he's trying to get her to do, and he just treats her really badly, and it sort of follows her journey of realizing that she has more value than this man has bestowed on her, and sort of her rising up in herself and figuring out who she is and getting the inner strength that she needs in order to stand up for herself. The Savior's Champion by Jenna Moreci is a sort of trial by combat book where 20 men are vying in a bloody competition for the hand of the savior, which is like their queen, but she's got magic. It's a fantasy book. It wasn't one of my favorite. I did a full review on it if you're interested in knowing more about it. It just, again, the characters felt a lot younger than they ought to have been for an adult novel, so it was kind of in between young adult, and it didn't really, it wasn't as well written as it could have been. All Hail the Carrion King by Thomas Godfrey is a fantasy adventure book that's sort of a take on the hero's journey, but without all of the dull parts, I guess you could say. It's set in this sort of dying world, and the author does a really fantastic job of juxtaposing really gray, devastated visuals against unrelenting joy and persistence. I thought the characters were interesting. I thought the world building was absolutely incredible without being over meticulous. So it wasn't dull. He wasn't going into detail on every blade of grass, but it was just enough that he could sort of paint these pictures in your mind and let you carry on with it. And I just thought that it was beautifully done. It was one of my favorite books of the year. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, I read for Halloween. I'll probably carry on that tradition. I sort of really enjoyed reading horror stories and horror shorts around the Halloween season. So I'll probably carry on that in 2023. But it was exactly as you expect, you know. The only difference is there are some of the details in Mr. Hyde's character that we get wrong in modern media. He's meant to be this like short, stunted, twisted little man, like you do in older novels where the bad guy always has to have some kind of deformity. We know better in 2022 and 2023, but back then they didn't, and that's sort of how they displayed that the person was a bad person. So, yeah, it was entertaining in the fact that you knew what was going to happen and still somehow the writing pulled you in. Lightlark by Alex Aster was quite the fluttered thing on TikTok, or Book Talk as it were. And a lot of people were really upset about the way that it was released or about the author herself. And when I read it, although I did find really deep flaws in the stories and the characters, I still really enjoyed it. So my experience with Lightlark is very different than just about every other book reviewer that you'll see. I don't know why I liked it so much, but I did. I thought that the story was fun and interesting, and the world was interesting, even if it wasn't particularly well thought out or needed more work. So yeah, my experience with Lightlark was a bit different than everybody else's, and if you're interested in seeing more about that, there's a video down below. Breach of Peace and Rebel's Creed are the first and second books in Daniel Greene's series that he's writing. They're sort of, I guess you'd call them flintlock fantasy, where the characters have guns and it's like, or gaslamp fantasy. It's a Victorian era story, but it's still fantasy. Anyway, they're in a world where God is real. He's a physical being who actually rules a kingdom and uses angels, actual angels, to enforce his will upon the people. It's a really interesting concept, and I thought that it was well done. I liked the first one, Breach of Peace, much better than I liked the second one. I'm very excited to read the third one. I'm hoping it doesn't come out this year because I'm trying really hard not to buy any new books in 2023 because I have all of this, and then there's 2 more bookshelves upstairs. And I'd like to actually get through some of the things that I already own. But yeah, so I really enjoyed Breach of Peace. I thought Rebel's Creed was good, but not as good as Breach of Peace. Yeah, okay. The Books of Blood, Volume 1 by Clive Barker is another one that I read for Halloween. And I will probably carry on with the Books of Blood series. If you don't like gore and sex mixed together, Clive Barker's probably not the author for you. I happen to like that mix. I don't know why, but I do. So I'm really into Clive Barker's writing. So far, everything I've read by him, I kind of liked. There were a few in the Books of Blood Volume 1 that were not as good as the other ones, but none of them were bad to my taste. So I'll probably carry on reading that in October. I also reread The Call of Cthulhu, The Beast in the Cave, Dagon, and The Alchemist by H.P. Lovecraft. I'd already read those before. I have a really big fat book of H.P. Lovecraft's complete works, but I read those for Halloween as well. So if you're looking for those and you're interested in Lovecraftian horror, of course there's little shorts there and down below and also on TikTok. So in addition to all of those, I also read a couple of indie books that I DNF'd. I did not finish them, mostly because the writing was too rough. They needed to be edited heavily, and I just couldn't get through the writing in order to enjoy the story. It's pretty rare. The writing has to be pretty bad for me to not be able to get through it. That's not to say that the story wasn't interesting or that the concepts weren't interesting. I just couldn't get past the writing. I'm not actually going to mention those titles because I think it's hard enough to break in as an indie author, and they don't need the added barrier of people reviewing their books badly. And maybe some of that's tinged by the fact that I'm also trying to become an author and I know how difficult that they have it. Maybe that's not fair to you guys. Maybe you do want me to tell you when I DNF a book and it's really bad, even if it's indie. But for now, at least, I'm not comfortable doing it. So I'm just going to skip the 2 indie books that I started reading and didn't finish. So yeah, my favorite books this year are probably a toss-up between The Last Thing to Burn by Will Dean and All Hail the Carrion King by Thomas Godfrey. They were both very different, but absolutely fantastic. They really pull you into the characters. They really get you invested in the story. And yeah, that's what you want in a book. My least favorite was probably The Cyborg Tinker by LaTorre. It just wasn't for me. It felt like a young adult book with a lot of sex scenes and swear words sort of slathered on top to try and make it more adult. And that just doesn't work. If the characters behave in a youthful way, if they have youthful mentality, if the plot is sort of jumbled and only hinges on the romance, and then there's this huge adventure going on outside of them and they just don't care about it because they're so tied up in each other, that all feels very young adult to me. When you're literally forced to murder people, but the thing that's tearing you up inside is this girl that you met 2 weeks ago and she's breaking your heart, like one who can break their heart after 2 weeks. And 2, you've got bigger things to worry about. So all of that felt very young adult to me, but not in a good way, not in the kind of way that you would enjoy reading a young adult book. So yeah, it just wasn't for me. If you liked it, that's great. I'm glad that you did, but I didn't. So that's it. That was my most and least favorite books of 2022. I'll probably try to do another list like this at the end of next year. I don't know. I don't read as prolifically as some other people, so, it's not quite as interesting. I also tend not to read a lot of mainstream books, Lightlark being the exception, but I tend to read a little off the grid. About half the books I read were pre-1900, so yeah. Anyway, thanks for hanging out, and thank you for supporting me in 2022. I hope 2023 is everything that you want it to be. Happy New Year. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and of course, if you like the way that I present information, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell down below. You can find all of my social media contacts in the description, and of course, if you want to keep up with me and the progress I'm making on my current novel, you can do that at effywritesbooks.com. Thank you so much for watching, have an excellent day, and I'll see you next time.